Welcome to Underrated Democracy.
I think it's important that we go back to the actual motion that was introduced probably 45 minutes ago. The committee report to the House its grave concern about apparent reprisals against witnesses following their testimony on the ArriveCAN app. That is the motion. And what we have heard from the Liberals and the NDP is anything but the importance and urgency of this particular matter. The House needs to have this matter before it so that all members, all parliamentarians, have a chance to speak to this. You know, Ms. Shanahan uses comments about urgency and how important this is, and we want to telegraph to Canadians that we're taking this serious. We take our job serious. But she forgets exactly what happened on October the 12th, when the Auditor General appeared, and after they were embarrassed, the entire Liberal bench embarrassed, as well as the NDP, that the Auditor General, you know, Ms. Shanahan, you can laugh all you want, but Canadians are watching me, and they're watching you laughing at me, and it's not a good look. You and your party and the NDP deliberately shut down the ability of the Auditor General to answer questions for a 2-hour period.
Yes, Ms.
I
Shannon.
am being spoken to directly, so I would like to respond to that.
That is
and there is no shutting down going on. We were proceeding with this work on Bonne et Due Forme.
Thank you.
And Mr. Brock, that he doesn't like the timing of it, I'm sorry, I can't help him there.
That is a very good reminder that point should be referred to the chair.
Chair.
So, yes, I appreciate your understanding, Mr. Brock. Back to you.
And she can remind Canadians of what she did, but the fact of the matter remains that after they were embarrassed, that the government did not inform, nor the CBSA inform the Auditor General, who was starting an investigation now that the RCMP were involved, was an absolute embarrassment. The Auditor General confirmed she only read about it, knew about it, after reading the article in the Globe and Mail. I was the one that asked that question, Mr. Chair, and the moment I concluded my round, this was the first round of questioning to the Auditor General, the first member of the Liberal bench who had the floor moved to adjourn, which I believe was Ms. Khalid, who moved to adjourn, and they had the votes to adjourn the meeting, thereby wasting the ability of the Auditor General to shed light on the full parameter of this ArriveCAN audit. And now, over the course of several months, which is the genesis behind the wording in motion number 2, we have direct evidence that 2 senior members of the CBSA, Mr. MacDonald, a former Director General of the CBSA, and Mr. Antonio Utano, another former executive, senior executive of the CBSA, testified not under oath, but knowing that they were there to tell the truth, pointed fingers and identified the president, Ms. O'Gorman, and the past president, Mr. Osowski, as well as Mr. Christian Firth and other members of the IT companies that were associated with not only the ArriveCAN issue, but also the issue involving another IT company, Bottler AI, had deliberately misled the Government Operations Committee. They informed the committee that they had evidence to produce to the committee to confirm their findings, that it wasn't just a he said, she said, or a he said, depending on the witnesses involved and the players involved. They actually had witnesses who could come to committee to, again, support the findings of both Mr. MacDonald and Mr. Utano, that our committee, that this government, national government committee, was deliberately misled by the CBSA. That is something that the Auditor General should be concerned about. Now, whether that's enough for them to alter their report, that's an issue for another day. That could be an issue following the release of the report to Parliament. But it's incumbent upon members of this committee to inform the Auditor General what has transpired. They testified on November the 7th of 2023. In exchange for that testimony, they both received letters from their new respective employers, Mr. Utano at Canada Revenue Agency, Mr. McDonald at Health Canada, that they were now suspended due to allegations of misconduct. Now, allegations of misconduct that Mr. Hayes would certainly be aware of were brought to the attention of the CBSA in November of 2022. And Ms. O'Gorman testified a number of times, Mr. Chair, at committee, that she took that very seriously, so much so that she did an internal review, found that there was a prima facie case, and referred the matter to the RCMP for a full investigation in November of 2022. But interestingly enough, which goes to the heart of this motion, it would appear that the findings in support of the suspension without pay for McDonald and Utano were only made after they testified truthfully and pointed fingers about CBSA officials lying to committee. That is a reprisal. And what sort of message are we as members allowing the federal public service, the professional federal public service, that we often hear that phrase from the Prime Minister and his cabinet and members of the Liberal bench, that they take pride and respect the professional federal public service. But these shenanigans that are happening right now with the professional federal public service is disgusting, and it ought not to happen. And we owe it to Canadians, we owe it to the Auditor General, we owe it to all parliamentarians to shed as much light on this as possible. Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano are both on medical leave, supported by documentation from their respective doctors as to what personal health toll they coming forward has had on them. The accusations, the death threats from the Canadian public that they have received is concerning. They also have the specter of being investigated or under investigation by the RCMP. Both testified very emotionally and raw about the real impact and effects that this is having. So what about those witnesses? What about those witnesses that they said will come to committee and support and corroborate what kind of shenanigans the CBSA has been involved in at the taxpayer's expense? What kind of message does that send to the other professional federal public servants? Will they want to come forward? Can they expect a suspension letter as a result of coming forward? These are serious concerns, and Mr. John should be all over these serious concerns and want to vote in favor of this motion because it strikes at heart of his argument. And let's talk about how unusual this is. We had the former clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Warnick, chime in. He said as follows, that the public finger-pointing by senior public servants is highly unusual, and given his tenure as a professional federal public servant, he says, I cannot recall any other instance of such public disagreement. It is an outlier. Suspensions without pay are also rare. It is a very strong measure to suspend without pay while a process is underway and no conclusions have been reached. Usually, disciplinary measures follow an investigation being completed, and suspension with pay is more common in the early stages. And lastly, because this has never been communicated to this committee, it also sends a very strong measure, it is also a very strong measure to suspend or permanently revoke a security clearance. And that's exactly what has happened to both Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano. Mr. Warnock says, this is tantamount to removing someone from that job and any other job that requires that level of clearance. It is not a common occurrence. So if my Liberal colleagues want to remember the words of the Prime Minister in 2015 about doing government different, about sunny ways, that Canadians can expect the most open, transparent, and accountable government this country has ever seen, they will vote in favor of this motion, as will I. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Brock. Bonjour, Madame Sinclair-Desgagnés. Vous avez la parole maintenant.